what can we actually change in public policy so that our education system is better preparing young people for this new economy?
Yeah, great question. So I do want to reiterate, the book is 100% not about politics and 99% not about policy. But I knew that people are going to want to talk about policy from this as well. So I put a postscript in the book that said, this wasn't a policy book, but if it were, here are some of the things we'd talk about next. Right. And a few of the things I try to flag are, number one, I think this new concept of grade 13 is a really bad idea. So we should have some understanding of where we got mass secondary education, because it has on net been a very great benefit. But it's on net. It's a mixed blessing. At the end of the Civil War, about 1% of Americans were high school graduates. By World War II, almost 80% were high school graduates. Today, it's not much more than 80%, so there hasn't been a lot of change from 1940s till today. But we created mass institutionalized experiences for 14 to 17, 18-year-olds because of industrialization, mass urbanization, immigration. It was a melting pot experience. There was sort of for good and ill Americanization stuff going on. Right. But fundamentally what happened is we realized there wasn't a lot of work for kids to do that wasn't dangerous and dehumanizing with some of what was happening with child labor in factories. But before that, kids had grown up as hunter-gatherers and as in farming communities doing a lot of work. And our leaders, our national conversation from 1870 to 1940 thought we need to institutionalize this time for 14 to 18-year-olds. Again, I think on net it's been good to have mass secondary education. I'm a strong believer in public funding of educational experiences, but I think we should have more debate about institutional form. We need more pluralization of the experience to take a lot of 16, 17, 18-year-old kids and say, you should spend the majority of your waking hours 5 days a week sitting inside in a classroom as a sort of passive recipient of knowledge. I think we also need to be wrestling through what does it look like to go be an active learner that pursues the world, that travels, that reads, that climbs the mountain, that learns to work, that deliberates about your body and intergenerational experiences, and what does a little soft stoicism look like? What does an intentional limiting of our consumption look like? And I'm worried that we haven't just sort of overlearned the lessons of secondary education as if it's an unmitigated good. We're trying to expand that concept into higher education. And so about 41 of 50 governors right now are remaking their K-12 education bureaucracy as a P-16, preschool to grade 16 bureaucracy. Preschool to kindergarten, that's an important debate about early childhood literacy and interventions. That's a really meaty debate we should have. But grade 13 to 16, I think is a dangerous idea. We don't want to take tertiary education and remake it on a secondary education model of passivity and spoon feeding. We want to do the opposite, I think. We want pluralized institutional forms for higher ed and for mid-career job retraining, and then we want that to crowd down into grade 12 and 11 and 10. We want to teach our kids that at some point in your learning, you flip this Socratic switch and you go from being a passive recipient of instruction from the front of the classroom to being an active learner that wants to throw open the doors to the library and shake the trees of nature and fruit and demand more learning. What Socrates was saying when he says you need a pregnant questioner to ever really educate somebody is he's saying that the soil isn't fertile unless the soil is crying out for the seed. You can't just machine gun, fire hose lots of seed at a 19, 21-year-old and think they're going to learn. Yeah. You need them to be asking questions. So I want us to be rethinking secondary education on a plural form of higher education model, not going in the opposite direction.
That's interesting. And as you mentioned grade 13, I'm reminded of one of the ideas in this book that really made me think. It was the whole idea about age segregation.
Yeah.
And how our school systems are promoting that. And I think about my own personal life, the value of having friends who are much older than me so I can gain a much broader view of the world, gain more familiarity with what's coming ahead in my life. And you talk about how this age segregation can have a detrimental effect and how the education system maybe needs to take a closer look at that. But can you just explain that a little bit more?
It is a very odd thing in human history, across cultures and across time, to have most of your peer cohort just be people who were born in your same birth year, and we segregate you in an institutionalized school where you tend not to know and experience life with people from different ages. One of the main things that happens as your frontal lobe is forming as a teenager is you're developing self-restraint and you're becoming aware of time. You're developing wisdom. Well, one of the ways to do that is not to live in the narcissistic experience of other people going through puberty or post-puberty who believe that every challenge of this second is the be-all and end-all of human existence. Right. It isn't true. My daughters, our older two are girls, and so there are two teenagers, 13 and 15. Pure slights can feel really, really painful. This acute wounding might last forever. And then if you know some people who are 70 or 85 in your life, and they're telling you stories about their life and where they developed a work ethic and places they've traveled and ways they've persevered and people they've loved and lost and the way they recovered, it turns out if you go down the street to old Mrs. Nelson and bake cookies with her a couple times a week, the pure slight isn't quite as lasting and immediate and supposedly eternal. And we need lots more intergenerational relationships. There is a curve on plastic surgery consumption in America right now that's really kind of extraordinary. And there may be cases and times and needs for certain things. But one of the things that's happening isn't just a kind of natural pursuing of the fountain of youth. Fleeing mortality and being scared of death and the fact that the world is broken, that is as old as the curse and the garden and being east of Eden, right? Yeah. But there's something different about our time and place that has the sort of narcissistic attachment only to the immediacy of this minute, that has a cotton candy-like experience. And one of the best antidotes to that is a little bit of wisdom from knowing different generations. The same thing is true, frankly, of our teens knowing about babies and people that are dependent and need them. There's some responsibility taking if our 17-year-olds had to know some 2-year-olds. In our family, we do some odd things. We'll try to figure out how to babysit together as a family, not because it's always great fun when you have sort of limited leisure time or recreation when I'm traveling back home, but if our kids have to learn to tend to and care for somebody else, they recognize they've got responsibilities to their community.